My father was a carpet fitter, as was his father before, and even our ancestors had been in the business of weaving and making carpets before the automation of the industry. Carpets had been in my family for a long, long time. But now, I was done with them, once and for all. It started a couple of weeks ago, when I noticed sales of carpets at my factory had suddenly skyrocketed. I was seeing profits on a scale I had never encountered before, in all my 20 years as a carpet seller. It was instantaneous, as if every single person in the city had wanted to buy a new carpet all at the same time. With the profits that came pouring in, I was able to expand my facilities and upgrade to even better equipment to keep up with the increasing demand. The extra funds even allowed me to hire more workers, and the factory began to run much more smoothly than before, though we were still barely churning out carpets fast enough to keep up. At first, I was thrilled by the uptake in carpet sales. But then it began to bother me. Why was I selling so many carpets all of a sudden? It wasn't just a brief spike, like the regular peaks and lows of consumer demand, but a full wave that came crashing down, surpassing all of my targets for the year. In an attempt to figure out why, I decided to do some research into the current state of the market and see if there was some new craze going round relating to carpets in particular. What I found was something worse than I ever could have dreamed of. Everywhere I looked online, I found videos, pictures, and articles of people installing carpets into their bathrooms. In all my years as a carpet seller, I'd never had a client who wanted a carpet specifically for their bathroom. It didn't make any sense to me. So why did all these people suddenly think it was a good idea? Did people not care about hygiene anymore? Carpet weren't made for bathrooms, not long term. What were they going to do once the carpets got irremediably impregnated with bodily fluids? The fibers in carpets were like moisture traps, and it was inevitable that at some point they would smell as the bacteria and mold began to build up inside. Even cleaning them every week wasn't enough to keep them fully sanitary. As soon as they were soiled by a person's fluids, they became a breeding ground for all sorts of germs, and bathrooms were naturally wet, humid places, prime conditions for mold growth. Carpets did not belong there. So why had it become a trend to fit a carpet into one's bathroom? During my search online, I didn't once find another person mention the complete lack of hygiene and common sense in doing something like this. And that wasn't even the worst of it. It wasn't just homeowners installing carpets into their bathrooms. Companies had started doing the same thing in public toilets too. Public toilets, shops, restaurants, malls. It wasn't just one person's fluids that would be collecting inside the fibers, but multiple, all mixing and oozing together. Imagine walking into a public WC and finding a carpet stained and soiled with other people's dirt. Had everyone gone mad? Who in their right mind would think this a good idea? Selling all these carpets, knowing what people were going to do with them, had started making me uncomfortable. But I couldn't refuse sales. Not when I had more workers and expensive machinery to pay for. At the back of my mind, though, I knew that this wasn't right. It was disgusting, yet nobody else seemed to think so. So I kept selling my carpets and fighting back the growing paranoia that I was somehow contributing to the downfall of our society's hygiene standards. I started avoiding public toilets whenever I was out. Even when I was desperate, nothing could convince me to use a bathroom that had been carpeted, treading on all the dirt and stench of strangers. A few days after this whole trend had started, I left work and went home to find my wife flipping through the pages of a carpet catalog. Curious, I asked if she was thinking of upgrading some of the carpets in our house. They weren't that old, but my wife liked to redecorate every once in a while. Instead, she shook her head and caught my gaze with hers. In an entirely sober voice, she said, "I was thinking about putting a carpet in our bathroom." I just stared at her, dumbfounded. The silence stretched between us while I waited for her to say she was joking, but her expression remained serious. "No way," I finally said. "Don't you realize how disgusting that is?" "What?" she asked, appearing baffled and mildly offended, as if I had discouraged a brilliant idea she'd just come up with. "Nero, how could you say that? All my friends are doing it." I don't want to be the only one left out. I scoffed in disbelief. What's with everyone and their crazy trends these days? Don't you see what's wrong with installing carpets in bathrooms? It's even worse than people who put those weird fabric covers on their toilet seats. My wife's lips pinched in disagreement, and we argued over the matter for a while before I decided I'd had enough. If this wasn't something we could see eye to eye on, I couldn't stick around any longer. My wife was adamant about getting carpets in the toilet, and that was simply something I could not live with. I'd never be able to use the bathroom again without being constantly aware of all the germs and bacteria beneath my feet. I packed most of my belongings into a couple of bags and hauled them to the front door. "Nero, please reconsider," my wife said as she watched me go. I knew she wasn't talking about me leaving. "No, I will not install fixed carpets in our bathroom. That's the end of it," I told her, before stepping outside and letting the door fall shut behind me. She didn't come after me. This was something that had divided us in a way I hadn't expected. But if my wife refused to see the reality of having a carpet in the bathroom, how could I stay with her and pretend that everything was okay? Standing outside the house, I phoned my mother and told her I was coming to stay with her for a few days while I searched for some alternate living arrangements. When she asked me what had happened, I simply told her that my wife and I had fallen out, and I was giving her some space until she realized how absurd her thinking was. After I hung up, I climbed into my car and drove to my mother's house on the other side of town. As I passed through the city, I saw multiple vans delivering carpets to more households. Just thinking about what my carpets were being used for, where they were going, made me shudder, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel. When I reached my mother's house, I parked the car and climbed out, collecting my bags from the trunk. She met me at the door, her expression soft. "Nero, dear, I'm sorry about you and Angela. I hope you make up." "Me too," I said shortly as I followed her inside. I'd just come straight home from work when my wife and I had started arguing, so I was in desperate need of a shower. After stowing away my bags in the spare room, I headed to the guest bathroom. As soon as I pushed open the door, I froze, horror and disgust gnawing at me. A lacy cream-colored carpet was fitted inside the guest toilet, covering every inch of the floor. It had already grown soggy and matted from soaking up the water from the sink and toilet. If it continued to get more saturated without drying out properly, mold would start to grow and fester inside it. "No," I thought, shaking my head. Even my own mother had succumbed to this strange trend. Growing up, she'd always been a stickler for personal hygiene and keeping the house clean. This went against everything I knew about her. I ran downstairs to the main bathroom and found the same thing. Another carpet, already soiled. The whole room smelled damp and rotten. When I confronted my mother about it, she looked at me guilelessly, failing to understand what the issue was. "Don't you like it, dear?" she asked. "I've heard it's the new thing these days." "I'm rather fond of it myself." But don't you see how disgusting it is?" "No, really, dear, no." I took my head in my hands, feeling like I was trapped in some horrible nightmare. One where everyone had gone insane, except for me. Unless I was the one losing my mind. "What's the matter, dear?" she said. But I was already hurrying back to the guest room, grabbing my unpacked bags. I couldn't stay here either. "I'm sorry, but I really need to go," I said, as I rushed past her to the front door. She said nothing as she watched me leave, climbing into my car and starting the engine. I could have crashed at a friend's house, but I didn't want to turn up and find the same thing. The only safe place was somewhere I knew there were no carpets in the toilet. The factory. It was after hours now, so there would be nobody else there. I parked in my usual spot and grabbed the key to unlock the door. The factory was eerie in the dark and the quiet, and seeing the shadow of all those carpets rolled up in storage made me feel uneasy, knowing where they might end up once they were sold. I headed up to my office and dumped my stuff in the corner. Before doing anything else, I walked into the staff bathroom and breathed a sigh of relief. No carpets here. Just plain, tiled flooring that glistened beneath the bright fluorescence, shiny and clean. Now that I had access to a usable bathroom, I could finally relax. I sat down at my desk and immediately began hunting for an apartment. I didn't need anything fancy, just somewhere close to my factory, where I could stay while I waited for this trend to die out. Every listing on the first few pages had carpeted bathrooms. Even old apartment complexes had been refurbished to include carpets in the toilet, as if it had become the new norm overnight. Finally, after a while of searching, I managed to find a place that didn't have a carpet in the bathroom. It was a little bit older and grottier than the others, but I was happy to compromise. By the following day, I had signed the lease and was ready to move in. My wife phoned me as I was leaving for work, telling me that she'd gone ahead and put carpets in the bathroom and was wondering when I'd be coming back home. I told her I wasn't. Not until she saw sense and took the carpets out of the toilet. She hung up on me first. How could a single carpet have ruined 7 years of marriage overnight? When I got into work, the factory had once again been inundated with hundreds of new orders for carpets. We were barely keeping up with the demand. As I walked along the factory floor, making sure everything was operating smoothly, conversations between the workers caught my attention. My wife loves the new bathroom carpet. We got a blue one to match the dolphin accessories. Really? Ours is plain white, real soft on the toes though. Perfect for when you get up on a morning. Oh yeah? Those carpets in the strip mall across town are really soft. I love using their bathrooms. Everywhere I went, I couldn't escape it. It felt like I was the only person in the whole city who saw what kind of terrible idea it was. Wouldn't they smell? Wouldn't they go moldy after absorbing all the germs and fluid that escaped our bodies every time we went to the bathroom? How could there be any merit in it at all? I ended up clocking off early. The noise of the factory had started to give me a headache. I took the next few days off too, in the hope that the craze might die down and things might go back to normal. Instead, they only got worse. I woke early one morning to the sound of voices and noise directly outside my apartment. I was up on the 3rd floor, so I climbed out of bed and peeked out of the window. There was a group of workmen doing something on the pavement below. At first I thought they were fixing pipes or repairing the concrete or something. But then I saw them carrying carpets out of the back of a van, and I felt my heart drop to my stomach. This couldn't be happening. Now they were installing carpets on the pavement. I watched with growing incredulity as the men began to paste the carpets over the footpath, cream-colored fluffy carpets that I recognized from my factory's catalog. They were my carpets, and they were putting them directly on the path outside my apartment. Was I dreaming? I pinched my wrist sharply between my nails, but I didn't wake up. This really was happening. They really were installing carpets onto the pavements, places where people walked with dirt on their shoes. Who was going to clean all these carpets when they got mucky? It wouldn't take long. Hundreds of feet crossed this path every day, and the grime would soon build up. Had nobody thought this through? I stood at the window and watched as the workers finished laying down the carpets, then drove away once they had dried and adhered to the path. By the time the sun rose over the city, people were already walking along the street, as if there was nothing wrong. Some of them paused to admire the new addition to the walkway, but I saw no expressions of disbelief or disgust. They were all acting as if it were perfectly normal. I dragged the curtain across the window, no longer able to watch. I could already see the streaks of mud and dirt crisscrossing the cream fibers. It wouldn't take long at all for the original color to be lost completely. Carpets, especially mine, were not designed or built for extended outdoor use. I could only hope that in a few days everyone would realize what a bad idea it was and tear them all back up again. But they didn't. Within days, more carpets had sprung up everywhere. All I had to do was open my curtains and peer outside, and there they were. Everywhere I looked, the ground was covered in carpets. The only place they had not extended to was the roads. That would have been a disaster, a true nightmare. But seeing the carpets wasn't what drove me mad. It was how dirty they were. The once cream fibers were now extremely dirty and torn up from the treads of hundreds of feet each day. The original color and pattern were long lost, replaced with new textures of gravel, mud, sticky chewing gum, and anything else that might have transferred from the bottom of people's shoes and gotten tangled in the fabric. I had to leave my apartment a couple of times to go to the store, and the feel of the soft, spongy carpet beneath my feet instead of the hard pavement was almost surreal, in the worst kind of way. It felt wrong, unnatural. The last time I went to the shop, I stocked up on as much as I could to avoid leaving my apartment for a few days. I took more time off work, letting my employees handle the growing carpet sales. I couldn't take it anymore. Even the carpets in my own place were starting to annoy me. I wanted to tear them all up and replace everything with clean, hard linoleum. But my contract forbade me from making any cosmetic changes without consent. I watched as the world outside my window slowly became covered in carpets. And just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, it did. It had been several days since I'd last left my apartment, and I noticed something strange when I looked out of my window that morning. It was early, the sky still yolky with dawn, bathing the rooftops in a pale yellow light. I opened the curtains and peered out, hoping, like I did each morning, that the carpets would have disappeared in the night. They hadn't, but something was different today. Something was moving amongst the carpet fibers. I pressed my face up to the window, my breath fogging the glass, and squinted at the ground below. Scampering along the carpet was a rat, not just one. I counted 3 at first, then more. Their dull gray fur almost blended into the murky surface of the carpet, making it seem as though the carpet itself was squirming and wriggling. After only 5 days, the dirt and germs had attracted rats. I almost laughed. Surely this would show them. Surely now everyone would realize what a terrible, terrible idea this had been. But several more days passed, and nobody came to take the carpets away. The rats continued to populate and get bigger, their numbers increasing each day. And people continued to walk along the streets with the rats running across their feet, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The city had become infested with rats because of these carpets, yet nobody seemed to care. Nobody seemed to think it was odd or unnatural. Nobody came to clean the carpets. Nobody came to get rid of the rats. The dirt and grime grew, as did the rodent population. It was like watching a horror movie unfold outside my own window. Each day brought a fresh wave of despair and fear that it would never end, until we were living in a plague town. Finally, after a week, we got our first rainfall. I sat in my apartment and listened to the rain drum against the windows, hoping that the water would flush some of the dirt out of the carpets and clean them. Then I might finally be able to leave my apartment again. After 2 full days of rainfall, I looked out my window and saw that the carpets were indeed a lot cleaner than before. Some of the original cream color was starting to poke through again, but the carpets would still be heavily saturated with all the water and be unpleasant to walk on, like standing on a wet sponge. So I waited for the sun to dry them out before I finally went downstairs. I opened the door and glanced out. I could tell immediately that something was wrong. As I stared at the carpets on the pavement, I noticed they were moving, squirming, like the tufts of fiber were vibrating, creating a strange frequency of movement. I crouched down and looked closer. Disgust and horror twisted my stomach into knots. Maggots. They were maggots, thousands of them, coating the entire surface of the carpet, their pale bodies writhing and wriggling through the fabric. The stagnant, dirty water basking beneath the warm sun must have brought them out. They were everywhere. You wouldn't be able to take a single step without feeling them under your feet, crushing them like gristle. And for the first time since holing up inside my apartment, I could smell them. The rotten, putrid smell of moldy carpets covered with layers upon layers of dirt. I stumbled back inside the apartment, my whole body feeling unclean just from looking at them. How could they have gotten this bad? Why had nobody done anything about it? I ran back upstairs, swallowing back my nausea. I didn't even want to look outside the window, knowing there would be people walking across the maggot-strewn carpets, uncaring, oblivious. The whole city had gone mad. I felt like I was the only sane person left. Or was I the one going crazy? Why did nobody else notice how insane things had gotten? And in the end, I knew it was my fault. Those carpets out there, riddled with bodily fluids, rats and maggots, they were my carpets. I was the one who had supplied the city with them. And now, look what had happened. I couldn't take this anymore. I had to get rid of them. All of them. All the carpets in the factory. I couldn't let anyone buy anymore. Not if it was only going to contribute to the disaster that had already befallen the city. If I let this continue, I really was going to go insane. Despite the overwhelming disgust dragging at my heels, I left my apartment just as dusk was starting to set, casting deep shadows along the street. I tried to jump over the carpets, but still landed on the edge, feeling maggots squelch and crunch under my feet as I landed on dozens of them. I walked the rest of the way along the road until I reached my car, leaving a trail of crushed maggot carcasses in my wake. As I drove to the factory, I turned things over in my mind. How was I going to destroy the carpets and make it so that nobody else could buy them? Fire. Fire would consume them all within minutes. It was the only way to make sure this pandemic of dirty carpets couldn't spread any further around the city. The factory was empty when I got there. Everyone else had already gone home. Nobody could stop me from doing what I needed to do. Setting the fire was easy. With all the synthetic fibers and flammable materials lying around, the blaze spread quickly. I watched the hungry flames devour the carpets before turning and fleeing, the factory's alarm ringing in my ears. With the factory destroyed, nobody would be able to buy any more carpets, nor install them in places they didn't belong, places like bathrooms and pavements. I climbed back into my car and drove away. Behind me, the factory continued to blaze, lighting up the dusky sky with its glorious orange flames. But as I drove further and further away, the fire didn't seem to be getting any smaller, and I quickly realized it was spreading beyond the factory to the rest of the city because of the carpets. The carpets that had been installed along all the streets were now catching fire as well, feeding the inferno and making it burn brighter and hotter, filling the air with ash and smoke. I didn't stop driving until I was out of the city. I only stopped when I was no longer surrounded by carpets. I climbed out of the car and looked behind me. At the city I had left burning, tears streaked down my face as I watched the flames consume all the dirty, rotten carpets and the city along with it. There was no other way, I cried out, my voice strangled with sobs and laughter, horror and relief that the carpets were no more. There really was no other way. Thank you so much for staying with me till the end. If you enjoyed this story and it sent shivers down your spine, please give this video a like. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me bring more stories like this to you. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out on the next chilling tale. Your subscription inspires me to create better and scarier content just for you. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and don't forget to watch your back. See you soon.